Hey listeners, Aliza and I are gearing up for a road trip through Southern California. We're exploring off-the-beaten-path food and drink spots and discovering how the state grows its incredible produce sustainably. Do you have a favorite hidden gem we should visit? Maybe a restaurant, bar, or market? We'd love your recommendations from San Diego to the San Gabriel Valley. Write us at hello@tastecooking.com to share. These special episodes, brought to you by our friends at Visit California, drop in late January. Stay tuned.
You said the reservation is hard to get, and that's true. Like, people book months in advance. And it's, to me, a lot of pressure. Because at the end of the day, we did start as a wine bar. We are just like a neighborhood restaurant. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as like a global neighborhood restaurant, but we're a neighborhood restaurant. So it's a lot of pressure.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. The Four Horsemen is a restaurant in Brooklyn. Have you been there? Have you had some natural wine there? Have you had some of the restaurant's bread and cultured butter? It's an amazing place up on Grand Street and has marked 10 years in the game with an incredible new cookbook. On this episode, I speak with the restaurant's longtime chef, Nick Curtola. Nick is one of New York's most consistent and skilled chefs and a real culinary force. We talk about the restaurant's legacy and how its humble beginnings have led to greatness, and we dig into Nick's personal journey in the restaurant business. Also on the show, Aliza and I pay tribute to the iconic Williamsburg restaurant and share some favorite memories from dining there over the years. I hope you enjoy this episode. Nick Curtola, welcome to This is Taste. It's great to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
This is going to be such a great conversation. I think many of our listeners have been to the Four Horsemen, have heard of the Four Horsemen, one of our really unique restaurants in New York, a real one-of-one restaurant. You haven't expanded the Four Horsemen in you've been around for a decade.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah.
And now you've released a cookbook, which I think... I've said this on some previews, but it's definitely one of my favorite books of the year. We don't publish it; it's an Abrams book, but at Taste, we love all books.
Appreciate it.
We don't
Thank
need.
you.
I want to start by first offering some condolences. I'm really really sorry about the passing of your partner Justin Chernow. I mean, we're all shocked. I'm really sorry. I just wanted to say that from the top. And if you wanted to say anything about Justin's legacy, just start. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like obviously it was quite a shock to all of us and very sudden. And we're still definitely reeling from it. I think it's tough being at the restaurant daily because he was such a big part of that and his presence is still felt there throughout the space. And yeah, it's just a really tough time we're trying to navigate. We had a really beautiful service for him last week. And like, speaking of his legacy, it was really beautiful to see like all of the people that came out to pay their respects. And they're just like real heavyweights in the industry. And you can really see, like, not only in New York, but, you know, across the globe, you can see his influence. You can see what he's instilled in like the new generation of people in that world, in the wine world. And he had like a really unique and special impact on the industry and especially that part of the industry. And yeah, it was like a huge loss that we're trying to just do our best to get through day to day.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like day to day. I know restaurants are like families. We talk about that.
Definitely.
And also with this book, I think it's such a testament to Justin's skill as a wine director and as somebody who's been at the forefront of natural wines. His notes are littered throughout the book in such a cool way. And I'm just so sorry, man.
Yeah. I think for me, with regards to the book too, I probably had the closest kind of like relationship to the book with Justin more than anybody else, just because like we work together daily. So we would do these meetings or write these little bits and pieces, and then we would kind of like, talk to one another in the basement about what had transpired and what we liked, what we didn't like. And I think my connection to him with the book was the strongest. So I got to show it to him actually like 2 days before he passed away, and he got to hold it. And that was like one of my last moments with him. So it's like a really bittersweet, but also like a really kind of like great moment that we had together. And he was super happy with it. And it was really cool to see that.
Well, definitely buy the book, pick it up, and read Justin's words. And I think there'll be much written. I'll link to in the show notes. There's been plenty of tributes. And if you're unfamiliar with Justin Chernow, you can read about him. This is your return to the show. In 2019, I spoke with you and your partner, James Murphy. I think it was in the basement of...
I think it was in his studio.
It was in his studio.
His
he had
office.
like a drum kit in the back. That was fun. And James writes in the intro, our completely naive and inexperienced partners found a largely unheralded chef and opened a restaurant in New York City. This reads like a death sentence. I love that line. Let's unpack it a bit about the setup for Four Horsemen when you're starting to think about opening a restaurant.
Yeah, I think I was in a really kind of weird place. Like when I kind of came up in cooking, my mindset was that I wanted to learn as much as possible and kind of like, pay my dues, so to speak. Whereas now I feel like there's more of a mindset to like climb the ladder a lot quicker. And I find a lot of young cooks just want to be like sous chefs instantly. And I was like, I wanted to work in quite a few restaurants, try to be more well-rounded, try to be like a really solid line cook, and then go from there. So I've been cooking for quite some time, and I felt like I was ready to jump into a chef role. But I just happened to come about meeting these people, and it was, I don't know, we just kind of clicked. It sounds bad on paper, and I think James is pretty good about getting those words, into the book, and it's appropriate, but also like something clicked with all of us where we had kind of traveled the world a bit. I had a good amount of experience in like quite a few different types of cuisine, and we just all kind of liked the same places and thought that there was a kind of like a missing piece in New York at that time that we thought we could fill in.
Well, it's an understatement to say that the Four Horsemen didn't really have much experience. I think James writes that the collected restaurant experience for the four was a few months at a golf course in 1987, and that's James' restaurant experience. The other two, James' wife and a tech entrepreneur, and of course Justin, are not restaurant people. So you open this restaurant without any experience, and really it likely created the unique opportunity to change some rules. So Nick, what are the first couple months like of the Four Horsemen?
Well, yeah, I think you're right about changing the rules. And I think a big thing was like, just kind of like recognizing the status quo, and kind of with people that aren't from the restaurant world, they were kind of like, well, why do we do it that way? Why do we have to do it that way? Why can't we do it this way? And it was honestly kind of eye-opening and a little bit of a breath of fresh air to see an outsider's perspective on it. And like, it could be frustrating at times too, because a lot of the ideas are like, no, we just kind of have to do that. It's just kind of how it is. But then some ideas would come about and they were kind of like, yeah, actually, maybe we can do that. And that actually isn't what a lot of people are doing, but it could work for us. So those first few months were just kind of feeling out, I guess, like what we wanted to make, what we thought was kind of like missing in the New York food and dining scene. And a lot of that kind of, revolved around conversations about other places around the world, mainly in cities like Tokyo, Copenhagen, London, Australia as well. Mm-hmm. And we felt like they were a little bit, or at least they had a few places that we kind of like aspired to be and to bring to New York.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about also like Chateaubriand and Vervolay in Paris, Vedstrand in 10 in Copenhagen, places that, and I'm going to say it for the first time, the wine bar, places where the wine bar is not simply where you enjoy wine, places that have a real culinary identity, and places that are running a menu that could stand on its own and receive Michelin stars from the New York Times, which is a really different approach to that New York was not ready for. You fight the word wine bar throughout the launch, and still probably fight it today. What's your relationship to that term, the wine bar?
I don't know. It's all different in hindsight, but like I feel like in the beginning we used it as a way to kind of like sneak ourselves into the restaurant world without too much pressure. But at the same time, we kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit once we wanted to like break free of that moniker and kind of like move into a more serious restaurant. We found that in the early days, a lot of people would come to our place before heading to another restaurant of like a similar caliber to what we were doing. It's like, no, we do that here. We can provide that. So it took us definitely a few years to break free of that, but it also took us a few years to gain the confidence to say like, no, we're like a legitimate restaurant. We're on the level of a lot of like other restaurants in New York City, and we like deserve to be standing here as a restaurant with a really incredible wine program.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that it's finding that balance was, a little bit tricky at times. And definitely in the early days, we were kind of like, why is everyone calling us a wine bar?
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, because we called ourselves
you guys
a wine
called
bar.
it in the press release and in the I guess Instagram moments.
But you're right about our vision of a wine bar was much different than I think what the vision of a wine bar in like America and New York was at that time. We were more thinking of like the places you mentioned in Europe and like a hero store in Tokyo, where like the food also was a huge component. And we weren't just like opening tins of seafood and serving baguette with like radishes and butter. You know what I mean? It was a little more thoughtful, but also still, obviously went really beautifully with wine. And yeah, like very thoughtful, creative cuisine coupled with like a really serious wine.
Really serious wine in an environment that's casual with an actual bar where you can sit at and dine and also enjoy wines. Mm-hmm. Let's fast forward very briefly and get to the modern times. And I'd love to get a sense of what a night is like at the Four Horsemen. Let's get into some details about what when you're walking in, you have Resi. Yeah. Hard table to book, by the way. You got to know someone. But honestly, what's it like right now menu-wise, and what's it like?
Yeah, menu-wise, I mean, it's always evolving. That's one thing we've kind of like tried to do since day one is evolve, always be creative. We have a very strong following of regulars, and I think that definitely pushes me to be more creative and kind of like change the menu a little bit more often, because I always wanted the menu to be approachable with like a good influx of like new dishes that people would come back for. Like, oh, I really want to go for that dish that I know they usually have on, but I also want to see like what's new. Yeah. And there's that certain like walking that tightrope of like not changing the menu so often that things are inconsistent and the guest is kind of confused, but changing it enough so like your staff is engaged, your core group of regulars and industry people are engaged, and then keeping it like fun and interesting for people coming in from out of town and really trying to like see what New York City has to offer. And I think now the thing for me that's really stressful is just like the level of expectations people have. And you said the reservation is hard to get, and that's true. Like people book months in advance, and it's, to me, a lot of pressure, because at the end of the day, we did start as a wine bar. We are just like a neighborhood restaurant. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as like a global neighborhood restaurant, but we're a neighborhood restaurant. So it's a lot of pressure. And I mean, I think especially once we got the Michelin star as well, the level of expectation is just so high. And you see these people when they come into the dining room at night and there's a line out the door, and it's kind of like, all right, what are we getting into? This place better be good. You know what I mean?
The amount
of
drip in the dining room. I mean, these aren't just young 20-year-olds with a little bit of extra pocket change. I mean, this is like Michelin folks who really want that.
It's interesting because I feel like we're not a typical Michelin star restaurant. No. I feel like you look around the city at other Michelin star restaurants, and we're kind of like the outlier. And that's something I'm really proud of, because I feel like somebody there kind of like got what we did. So our like clientele and the guests that come in are so varied. Like it ranges so much, and it constantly kind of like blows me away. And it's cool. It like keeps us kind of like, I don't know, it helps keep us like relevant, I feel like.
Oh, for sure. And let's talk about some of the dishes. I'd like to just get into culinary talk. Let's
sure.
Food talk, baby. Let's talk about what some of these legacy dishes are at the Four Horsemen, and maybe some of the things you're improvising. We're recording this in early October, cool season. What's on the menu these days?
Yeah, so we're gearing up for fall. Obviously, the last couple of years have been weird this time of year because I'm mentally prepared to start putting kind of like fall, early winter stuff on the menu, but the weather is like, I don't know. I'm overdressed right now. I'm like,
you look great. You're wearing like definitely some wool, and I'm like, bro.
But it's also like almost 70 degrees out. You know what I mean? So it's a tricky time of year to cook. I feel like the seasonal changes for me are always the hardest time of year to cook. And we also don't like to rehash a lot of dishes too, if we don't have to. But yeah, on the menu right now, we have like, one of my favorite things we do is this veal sweetbread skewer. And a lot of times you find sweetbreads and they're deep fried, and that's like obviously delicious and amazing. But one of my sous chefs kind of came up with putting them on a skewer. And we, after a trip we made to Singapore, where we had like, on our last day, we had these skewers grilled near the beach, and they were like absolutely incredible glazed, like cuts of like offal and things like that. So he came back, we had this idea to do with the sweetbread. They're kind of glazed with like a piri sauce. It's a little spicy. And then we have this like really kind of short cured soy egg yolk on the side that you use to like dip the sweetbread into. That's really amazing.
Very cool. I mean, it reminds me a little of like yakitori style in Tokyo with a little egg in there.
Definitely. Too. It's kind of like a little mishmash there.
Yeah.
And then, we just put this roasted chicken on. We're getting these golden chickens right now that just have like a really beautiful like flesh and meat, but also like the skin gets crazy crispy. We dry them out in house for a little bit. And then we're doing it with this like, first of the season spigarello. So that's like kind of like we're inching into fall a little bit. So it's like really quickly blanched and then like sauteed with some garlic chili oil. But there's also like some figs in there too for some sweetness.
Yeah.
That's really nice. We're always playing around with different fish. And like we just brought back this tuna carpaccio dish. That's like a classic and actually in the cookbook that we took off for a little while, pretty much because we had it on for so long. I was like, our menu's small.
Yeah.
So when something stays on there for too long, I'm always like, I need space for something else. But yeah, that dish is really fun with like some yuzu kosho and yuzu zest and like a tonnato sauce based off of like what I ate when I worked in Italy, almost 20 years ago now, that kind of like stuck in my head, and I didn't bring it to fruition until we opened Four Horsemen. So, I mean, that's one of the things I love about like food and cooking are those like flavor memories that just kind of stick with you.
Yuzu kosho and tonnato, it's a cool combination there, and just shows how your global menu is, it doesn't know any borders. And
I know, I think about that a lot too, and for some reason it works. I don't know, like on paper sometimes I'm like, oh, seems like a little bit all over the place. But I think they're like the through line and everything is like, we just try to make food that tastes really good. That's first and foremost above any aesthetic or any kind of like trend or anything like that. It's like, does this dish taste good? I look around, I'll try it with my staff. If I don't get the reaction I'm looking for, we pivot, we try it again. We, keep working on it. But I always do tasters at work for a dish, and like I have to get a certain reaction from my staff about it, or else I'm not into it.
It's not working. Well, you're a really humble guy, but Nick, you've got extremely mad skills, and it kind of your background. I want to talk a little bit about it. Where you worked. You worked at Gladys in Crown Heights, and the Yunnan Kitchen, this long forgotten but incredible restaurant. Like a decade and a half ago, 15 years ago. You also worked at Franny's, and we recently had Ina Garten on the show, and we asked her simply, what single restaurant would you want to bring back from the dead? And she mentioned Franny's.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
The restaurant you worked at for years. So talk about the style of cuisine that you've been able to pick up from all these spots, and a little bit about your time at Franny's.
Yeah, Franny's was definitely a huge influence for me, but not only for me, for a lot of restaurants in New York. And I think a lot of people kind of don't realize that, especially like the next generation of cooks, is exactly how much influence that restaurant had on this city. And it's crazy because it was like a small pizzeria essentially, and the pizzas were amazing, but I think like a lot of people remember the really seasonal cooking that they would do there. And for me, I just moved from California. I worked out there for about 8 or 9 years. And I was kind of looking for something a little bit similar in New York, and I found it there. Like those two guys, John Adler and Danny Amen, they were going to the market 2 times a week, 3 times a week, getting like insane hauls of produce, bringing it back in a yellow cab. And it was just like so quintessential New York, but also such, it's not like had a restaurant near Union Square. These guys were on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. It was like a huge undertaking.
It was a busy street. It was
busy
definitely
street,
not a restaurant
not
corridor.
easy to get to. Yeah. And I don't know, I really respected that, and I respected what they did with those ingredients and the level of consistency that they had because of their fine dining backgrounds, but they applied that to kind of like a really casual neighborhood restaurant that was super approachable, but the food was incredibly beautiful, incredibly thoughtful, very well seasoned, very well executed, day in, day out, super busy restaurant. I think a lot of people wanted to emulate that.
Yeah, and many did, and they really are in terms of new American cooking with a root of Italy. That template has been copied over and over to great success. I love the moment in the book you talk about you were attending a dinner in San Francisco, and the chef Fulvio Siccardi is there, and you boldly go up to him at this dinner and ask to work at his restaurant in Alba. And Nick, what's it like approaching an Italian great, this amazing chef, to go say, "Hey, I want to work for you"?
I had it in my mind that I wanted to go abroad and work in Europe. It was just something people were doing then. I mean, they're still doing it now, but the big thing was to go to France and try to work in Paris, or, a restaurant on the outskirts of Paris or somewhere in France. And for some reason, I wanted to go work in Italy. I mean, my family's background is Italian. And that food just kind of seemed to click with me. So I happened to go to, and I always think back on it because like pop-ups, essentially it was a pop-up. And those like weren't really a thing back then. Like having a guest chef dinner was like a pretty special thing. My parents, for some reason, got us like tickets to go to this. It was a restaurant that they liked in San Francisco. And I think the chef was pretty hyped on Fulvio coming in. Yeah. So they got tickets. Anyway, I just asked him. I don't know why I did it, but I was just like, I really want to. His English was like decent.
Yeah.
So I felt like I could do it. You know what I mean? I didn't speak any Italian. And I told him that. And I was like, do you think it would be a problem? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, just email me. And I did. I like totally called him on it. And he's like, all right, yeah, if you can be at the Alba train station in like September, I'll come pick you up. He put me up in an apartment.
Oh, wow.
We had apartments for all the cooks that were from out of the area. Like a couple of cooks lived near there. This place was like very remote though.
Yeah.
Very small town up in the hills, like Piemonte, castles everywhere. This place is like right at the base of a castle. And like it was in 2006. I mean, there wasn't Wi-Fi, there wasn't smartphones. It was very isolating. So I'm like surprised that, I don't know, it was just like a really weird moment in my life that was like, probably one of the more stressful moments I've ever had, but also like the most gratifying and eye-opening and fulfilling ones as well.
What's Fulvio putting you through and as a stage there at the restaurant? Is he instilling wisdom, or is he just having you like straight up do like the grunt work?
No, it wasn't grunt work. He was very kind of like warm and kind and like really kind of goofy. Mm-hmm. Like he was kind of weird, which I wasn't expecting because it was my first Michelin star experience in a kitchen. So I was expecting a lot of grunt work, a lot of like just picking herbs and like head down, but It was a really beautiful like family environment. And his wife, I mean, it's very Italian. Like his wife ran front of house. Their like daughter was running around the restaurant at all times. And I don't know, it was a really, really cool experience in that way. Day to day, making pastas, making sauces, very long hours, like 6 days a week. But then, Sunday was a half day. We all sat down and had a meal together. And then Monday, we hung out with all the cooks, and I went around town. We went on little trips to like a couple hours away from where we were staying, and like Torino and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know, it was really cool to like witness regional Italian cuisine like up close. It's hard to like, for me, when I was a young cook, it was hard to wrap my head around that until I actually saw it.
Well, it's nearly 20 years ago, and this is a time when really America is starting to wake up to regional northern dishes versus Pulian dishes and
Sicilian
all that.
Food
and Sicilian
like that,
food. And it's cool that you chose Italy versus France. So Nick, on to the cookbook. 10 years this restaurant is run, and really you've been patient. I'm sure week one, some agent was emailing you. And of course, James Murphy, your partner, is a celebrity in his own at LCD Sound System and music stuff. So, but you turned it all down. You waited 10 years, which I think is so cool and makes this book even more special. Nick, tell us about deciding on the recipe list and really what you wanted to do to translate these idiosyncratic, very chefy dishes for the home kitchen.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I set out to not make it a chefy book. I didn't want it to be a coffee table book that just sat on someone's table. They flip through it once, looks beautiful, but then they never go back to it. Cookbooks for me, I always, in this process, thought of the books I love, like books by David Tanis or like River Cafe or the Zuni Cafe book. Mm-hmm. Those books are beautiful, or like Nigel Slater's books. I mean, those books are beautiful, but also like I find myself picking them up constantly. And I wanted this to be a book people could go back to. Kind of like every time you go into it, you get like a couple little bits of information that you didn't catch the first time. So when I was picking the recipes, there was some stuff I really wanted to put in there as like a chef flex. You know what I mean? That I kind of like caught myself saying like, yeah, but is like anybody going to make this at home? You know what I mean? And I really weeded out a lot of those recipes and tried to include things that like I felt like weren't out of the realm of somebody cooking at their house. And some of them are more, there's definitely some recipes in there for like a nerdy home cook that like really wants to geek out and like, oh, I want to recreate that specific dish. I did include a couple of those, but for the most part, I mean, it's just really great seasonal cooking with a couple like tips and tricks along the way.
I love it. And I want to start by asking you about this ham and cheese sandwich on focaccia. It's a real masterclass. It's a multi-page recipe, and it really has a strong point of view. Comté cheese on a sandwich with ham. It's like you're like, this is the best cheese, and you use that cheese quite a bit. You must love it. Right. Talk about developing this kind of masterclass of creating your own sandwich from the focaccia.
Yeah, so I think that recipe for me is kind of interesting. We wrote this book kind of like during the pandemic. And it was a lot of back and forth about like how much of the pandemic do we want to include in this book? Is this information going to seem dated 10 years from now? And people are like, I don't want to remember any of that, right? So we cut a lot of that. But the one recipe I wanted to keep in was the ham and cheese, because that to me was like, it symbolized a turning point at the restaurant. And it was an important time when it was pretty much just me and my sous chef, Ben, in the basement, like day to day, like, what are we going to do today? What kind of pantry things are we going to do? What can we do? And then I don't know if you remember, but like people started opening up like little windows, or their storefront was open for pickup. And it turned into like, what can we create that would be really nice for people to take away, et cetera. And the idea came to do a sandwich. And for me, like the Paris baguette with, butter and ham is like one of my favorite things to eat. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of an homage to that, but also like a little bit of a play on like deli sandwiches I grew up eating with like really thinly sliced ham, like piled high inside of a sandwich with like kind of like thicker slabs of cheese on it and like a good amount of like mayonnaise or some kind of like spread, you know what I mean? And with the focaccia, it was something we had kind of done during our set lunch for a couple of years, and I was pretty proud of it. And honestly, it was like a lot easier to make than our house bread, our sourdough that we did. And it was something I could do daily. So that's why we did it. And that's kind of how the origins of that sandwich. And then once we got back into the swing of things, it kind of like lingered on our lunch menu for a while. It was like the last kind of like ode to that time period. And so I wanted to include in the book. And I think it's just a ham and cheese sandwich, but I don't know, there's a great story there. And also, I don't know, it's with the Comté, it's really beautiful, like pepperoncini on there. It's nice.
Yeah, you put pepperoncini, and what's the condiment?
So it's basically like Dijonaise. It's like
right?
a mayo that we make in house, just with some Dijon folded into it.
Yeah. It's a really, really unique sandwich, and I paged through the focaccia recipe, which I think everyone this fall should make some focaccia.
Yeah, it's so nice to make at home. Definitely,
and it's a pan, so it's a little bit different than baking on a deck or baking it in the oven.
Right.
You've got a little flexibility there.
Yeah.
You make the statement, real cooks make great salads, which I think is true. What do you mean exactly?
I mean, I kind of borrowed that from David Tanis, going back to him. I mean, his writing was like heavily inspired me. But I think it's kind of like, I don't know, when I was kind of coming up in restaurants, everybody wanted to work like the meat station or the fish station. And I worked at this place called Camino in Oakland, and the chef, Russ, like really instilled in me that like salads were much trickier to make. I mean, finding that balance with lettuces, with like vegetables, whether it be, and I'm not talking just like leafy salads. When I think about salads, I think about even something like wax beans, but like blanching a wax bean perfectly, seasoning it perfectly, kind of like marrying it with a vinaigrette and cheeses and fresh herbs. That to me is like a much harder thing to maneuver than grilling a Wagyu steak. I mean, a Wagyu steak is going to be good most of the time, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, for me, like a salad is all about balance and cooking is all about balance. So if you can understand salads and garde-manger, pantry station, I feel like you can kind of wrap your head around everything else. To me, it's at the Four Horsemen, especially, it's the hardest station to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the hardest dish to make for home cooks. I think we often struggle with everything from the balance of the dressing to getting our produce dry. Nick, tell us a bit, just what's a tip to make a great salad?
I think kind of, being really delicate with the greens, probably dressing them less than you think. They don't take a lot. Getting them really dry before you store them so they don't wilt is another good one. And then just thinking about the balance of, if you have a bib lettuce, for example, you don't want to put a bunch of heavy toppings on top of that or heavy ingredients into that salad. Whereas if you have something like radicchio or tardivo or something like that, then you can load in like some really kind of chunky pieces of cheese and some nuts. And just really thinking about, I don't know, it's hard, but like the final end product and what you're looking to get out of it.
Yeah, I think weighting down your delicate leaves is a definitely a common error.
I would say also another note, more acid than you think.
Yeah, totally agree.
I see the 3-to-1 ratio a lot of like oil to vinegar. I probably do almost 50-50.
Yeah, no,
with a little bit of fresh like acid right at the end.
Also, just like bib lettuce and dressing is totally fine.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't have to flex with like the knife skills on a salad.
Yeah, as long as you're taking pride in like cutting out really beautiful piece of lettuce, not just tearing it, using a sharp knife. Because if you're not using a sharp knife, the lettuce will bruise easier because you're just kind of like smashing its cell walls, So yeah, sharp knife, really delicate with like your fingertips when you're handling lettuce. I'm kind of like crazy about salad greens and lettuces at the restaurant. Like you can ask any of my cooks.
So you'll check the stations and be like, yo, guys.
All the time, especially with like salads. Yeah. And especially with lettuces. I'm very picky about how I like them treated. And like, I really have to like instill that into new cooks that start with us.
As an aside, you mentioned Russ Moore from Camino, and I love that you bring up this restaurant, such an iconic restaurant in Oakland. We published the book here at 10 Speed. You can check it out. It still is available. It's still in print. So buy the Camino book. If you have any interest in cooking over a live fire, what a dramatic restaurant. You walk in, it's like wider than it is deep, and it has this fireplace at the center. Give us a memory of Camino, because I want our listeners to remember this place.
Camino for me, I think Russ was like really at the forefront of that movement of cooking over live fire. He came from Chez Panisse, and they obviously have a hearth down in the restaurant there. And they're, known for that, but he kind of like really expanded on that. And I remember I went to go eat at Chibari.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need to go work somewhere like this where somebody's doing cooking like this. Who's doing it? And it happened to be in my backyard, and I was working in Oakland at the time. And I think I maybe emailed Russ off of like a Craigslist ad and got in on the opening team, kind of like helped, set up stations, set up equipment, that kind of thing, like really early on, which was like a really cool experience for a young cook to kind of be part of an opening team. So I remember going in there, like the smells of like the wood burning fire, lighting the grill, lighting the wood burning oven. And then with Russ, for me, my big takeaway was just his kind of like experience with produce and working with farmers, and his knowledge of like produce, not even seasonal produce, but like micro seasonal produce. That was somewhere I wanted to get in my career. And that was something I strive for and studied constantly, because I was just blown away that this guy knew like everything that was in season at any given moment, what quality it was in, you know what I mean? What level of like starchiness it would likely have and what we would have to do to it because of that. That to me was really eye-opening.
Let's talk about Eshtabari back when you went, because like now it comes up all the time in our conversations, and it is like the hardest reservation in the world. It's now on World's 50 Best every year. But back when you visited, it was not that. And I wish I could go back in a time machine and go at that time.
Yeah, I went, honestly, because I used to watch Cook's Tour, like Anthony Bourdain's Cook's Tour, his first like TV show.
The first one on Food Network,
And I remember he went there and I was like, what is this place? Like, I have to go here. And I'd wanted to go to Spain for a really long time. I might have already actually been to Spain before that time period, but I wanted to explore like San Sebastian a bit. So I went up there with the like whole goal being to go to Echabari. So I went to San Sebastian. We got a rental car, and this was like before GPS. So I remember like going on like MapQuest or like Yahoo Maps and like printing out the directions. And if you've ever been there, it's very remote.
Yeah.
And we definitely got lost along the way, which was like part of the journey and honestly pretty kind of fun. But yeah, just going there, it was like a very magical experience. And it was definitely one of those places that shaped who I am as a cook and how I cook and how I approach ingredients, because there's a certain level of simplicity, because they're able to get, you know, some of the best ingredients, like, at least like for their region and what they're trying to do. I mean, it was incredible.
Love that memory. You have a really great essay about PJs, and you have this term, precious juices. And I've never heard this explained. I've never read this explanation. It makes 100% sense. And give us a sense of how the home cook can really, you know, create a PJ's practice in the home kitchen.
I mean, yeah, it's a weird kind of like just idiosyncratic thing we do at the restaurant, or it's one of those things that I kind of started saying and then it caught on for us. Like every kitchen has their weird kind of like phrases and things that they say, and that's definitely one of them. But yeah, it's just like it came from just kind of watching people cook, especially proteins, and like we do them on like a sizzle tray or a quarter sheet tray or whatever it is. And they would kind of like put the meat on the plate and then like go to put the, you know, tray that it was cooked on in the dish station or something. I'm like, no, get those are all like the drippings and stuff. Like get that, like people in the UK put that stuff on toast and call it like a dish. You know what I mean? Right. It's a beautiful thing. And I was thinking about, you talk about like dishes we're doing currently. I did this like roasted grape toast with like this Chev cheese.
Yeah.
And all the grapes, like when you cook them, you know, they get really kind of like crispy and the flavor gets concentrated and they leach out their juices. Those kind of caramelize a bit. And then we hit those with like a little vinegar, and all those juices we want to get on that on the plate and on the dish. Those are like the precious juices, you know. It's like silly, but it's just a way for us to think about not throwing something away that could actually be pretty tasty.
Love that explanation. And the toast recipes are really great. Like you make a really strong point that you can put a lot of things on toast. And I love a Concord with a sharper cheese or even a creamy cheese, and reduction of vin in the juices of the grapes. Terrific. What's another toast that comes to mind from the book?
I think for us, like the leek toast is a classic at this point. And it's funny because like, yeah, I've always done toast at the Four Horsemen. That's definitely an old Camino thing. It's an old Chez Panisse thing. Mm-hmm. It's an old Franny's thing. And now it's an old Four Horsemen thing. But yeah, like the leek toast came about, and it's one of these beautiful moments where like my sous chef helped out with family meal that day and happened to do these braised leeks. And I happened to be working on some sort of toast with like a whipped ricotta. And I was like, oh man, what did you do these leeks? These are amazing. You know what I mean? And he kind of just like confit them really slowly in oil in an oven, and then like cranked it near the end to kind of get a really nice like roasted flavor on them. And then we just like spoon them over, ricotta with some really nice anchovies that a purveyor had kind of like just dropped off for us to check out. And those kind of moments happen in restaurants, or at least in our restaurant, like a lot, where things will just kind of fall into place magically.
Yeah.
And I really have a soft place in my heart for dishes that happen like that, happen organically, happen with like the team, with people kind of working together in like a think tank where we're always just kind of talking and thinking about food. So the leek toast for me is definitely that dish. Yeah.
I love the idea of a toast as a centerpiece, because it can definitely happen.
100%.
Let me ask you, James Murphy, LCD Sound System, he'll play like, 14 shows at Brooklyn Steel. Do you go to the shows ever? Do you ever like hit the backstage?
I've been to a few. Yeah, definitely been to a few.
Is it like, having the fans come into the restaurant is obviously part of the deal. How do you as a chef, negotiate some of these fans coming in? I mean, James is there, which is great, and we talked about on our last episode about what it's like. But for you, what's it like having, a prominent musician as one of your partners?
Yeah, I think James is really great about kind of like separating himself from the restaurant as far as like being a famous musician. He's always been like that. He's always like, you guys are doing all the hard work. Like, the focus should be on you, not me. I come in, I do things here and there. Mm-hmm. Obviously did the sound and like a lot of the design, but day to day, once the restaurant opened, they've been very hands off, like and I think that's been really beneficial to us. And they've also been there for like key critical moments where we really needed them. But yeah, navigating like fans and things like that. I mean, I feel like they're pretty subtle. You know what I mean? Like, you can kind of tell here and there when they're in. And I feel like a lot of that happened when we first opened, because the original press we were getting was obviously about James. Nobody knew who the hell I was. You know what I mean? Or like anybody else really, maybe Justin.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what they grabbed onto. And I think a lot of people came in initially for that. But now I think they're coming for the restaurant, and there are a few here and there where they also happen to be fans of LCD, and like, they're pretty chill. Yeah. And I don't have any kind of problem with that. And I don't know. James has been great about like separating that.
Yeah, it's a real art when you have the profile owner, but you defer to your team. It's very punk, actually.
It's punk, and he's got a lot of faith in us, and like that's happened because we've worked together for 10 years now, and we kind of have like our own language with one another, and there's a lot of trust.
I've always loved the budino, which to me is one of the great desserts that maybe doesn't get the respect it deserves. We've written a feature on it. I'm going to link to the show notes. It's a great feature about why it's such a great restaurant dish. And I see it in your book, and I'm like, man, I got to talk to you about the budino. Take us through your recipe and why it's so great.
So that dish for me was like kind of an eye-opening moment. In my culinary journey, I guess. But I used to go to this place called Fenton's Creamery in Oakland. Like,
we could go long. I've talked about Fenton several times.
So the black and tan there.
Oh, yes.
Like, I always used to get that as a kid. We would go to like the San Francisco Zoo or the Oakland Zoo, and we'd always stop there afterwards. And I used to get the black and tan. And for the longest time, I was like, what is this? I thought it was like caramel sauce. I was like, what is this sauce they're putting on here? It had like a slight graininess that I really liked, that when it like hit the ice cream, it kind of hardened a little bit. And it wasn't until I made this like, budino that I figured out, it's like butterscotch. That's what people are talking about when they're talking about butterscotch. Just like in my mind, I immediately had this like ratatouille moment. You know what I mean? Where that like food critic eats the ratatouille and is like taken back. I was like, holy shit, all these years, that's what it was. Like, and so we turned it into a budino, and that's like, something similar to what we'd do at like Franny's or something like that. We did a budino actually in Piemonte as well. So, just like a play on some dishes I had been comfortable working with in the past, and then whipped cream, some salted caramel. And then we use these like feuilletine, which is like a feuille de brique pastry, just kind of crumbled on top of that. And I don't know. It's very comforting. I wouldn't say like visually it's the most, insane looking dish, but when you eat it, it's beautiful textures, beautiful level of like richness, and like a nice sweetness. We don't sweeten the cream, so it's like
Very
nice,
Italian.
Yeah, it's
Very
nice to
Italian.
like dip into this sweet kind of custard and then have a kind of like a fatty cream to kind of like balance it out.
Butterscotch pudding,
Yeah,
it doesn't sell itself because of the Jello version.
Yeah,
but when the Italians do it and when you do it, wow.
Yeah, it was a great moment for me. I mean, just like another reason I love food and cooking, and just like I don't know, logging those experiences as a chef, and just like I don't know, it was really cool.
So Nick, let's talk about restaurant number 2. It's been in the press, so I think you can say a little bit about it. It's across the street from Four Horsemen. It's double in size, if not larger. And you're working on the menu. What can you say about when you're going to open around, and like what's this new restaurant all about? Do you have a name?
Yeah, we're gonna call it I Cavallini.
Yeah.
Which is like a play on the Four Horsemen. It's like the horsies.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's about 75 seats. There's a back garden. It's just going to give us a little more room to do things that we can't do at the Four Horsemen with regards to like special events, seating larger parties. And yeah, the food is going to be Italian. I kind of want to go back to those kind of those roots that I have. And I want to do just kind of like regional Italian cooking, not necessarily like red sauce Italian. And yeah, regional Italian cooking using like really high level of like produce, meats, fish. Same thing we do at Horseman, but just applied through that lens.
Fresh pastas?
Fresh pastas for sure.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, try to do everything we can in house, and yeah, try to bring back a little bit of that like Franny's vibe to Brooklyn.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's gonna be a hot ticket in Brooklyn when you open. When are you gonna open?
Probably, hopefully spring.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love that. I can't wait to have you back talk about that restaurant.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Is there one recipe that you're working on for the opening menu that you've been like,
God.
Man.
No, I think right now we're mostly just trying to visualize the space, trying to visualize kind of like what a service would look like and how the food will plug into that. You know what I mean? If we want to do like some larger format dishes and things of that nature. Yeah.
So you are doing a regional Italian restaurant. Will you be visiting regions of Italy to prep for this?
That's the plan. I'm going to Rome in November for like a really quick trip to kind of get a little bit immersed for a few days, and then hopefully kind of like early next year, I might try to go back for like a week or two and just kind of jump around a little bit.
So which region would you really like to dig into?
So I've traveled kind of a lot through Italy. I've had the good fortune of doing that. I did a road trip. I worked there, and then I did a road trip about 10 years ago where I kind of drove through like all the way from top to bottom and back. I didn't really explore too much of like Emilia Romagna, which I'd like to get to. Puglia, I'd really like to check out and get to see that. Calabria as well. I kind of drove through those areas, but like I didn't really get immersed. I'd like to do that. And then, I always love to go back to Rome. I think the food there is really incredible.
Yeah,
so.
I love that. Big fans of Puglia here. We've done a couple of taste travels there.
I'll have to hit you up for some tips.
Yeah, Lecce's got some spots. Bari's got some spots.
Bari,
yeah. Bari has some spots. I mean, honestly, gelato in Puglia has really, really impressed me. I know other regions and Italians listening to the show might disagree, but good gelato in Puglia.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Nick, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The best fruit?
Ripe melon.
Interesting. I think it's hard to find. How do you find a ripe melon when you're just looking at it?
Peak summer for like a few weeks and you get them. I'm like really picky with fruit. I honestly don't really like a lot of fruit, like berries and stuff like that. I like weird stuff like persimmons and, but yeah, ripe melon, middle of summer. It's tough. Go to a farmer's market. They have it.
Yeah. The worst vegetable?
Worst vegetable. Oof. I'd probably say okra.
Yeah.
For me, granted, like maybe I haven't had it prepared properly or perfectly or, in a way that really showcases it. But when I've had it, I haven't enjoyed it that much.
Yeah. The best dessert?
Best dessert. I weirdly like oh, that's tough. Like a flan or a perfect custard or a panna cotta, something like that. That's like executed perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like doing these. This is a technical dessert.
Technical.
Yeah.
Respect that.
Respect it. Respect the game. A restaurant you are most excited to visit in the world?
It's kind of a cop-out maybe, but I haven't been. It's been open a long time, but I'd like to go to Noma.
Yeah.
You know? I see
No cop out.
everyone
Good
else
spot.
go, and I haven't
Yeah.
been. I'd like to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Because Franny's has come up on the show for this next question, I'm going to ask it to you. Is there a restaurant you wish could come back from the dead for an evening?
And I can't say Franny's?
I mean, you could say Franny's, of course.
That might be a real cop-out.
You could say Franny's, but is there a restaurant that maybe New York, back in the day, you've been part of the community for a long time?
Uncle Boone's?
Yeah.
I feel like Thai Diner scratches that itch pretty well, but
Yeah.
I really love that Uncle Boone space. I had a couple really memorable meals in that dining room, and it was a really cool vibe.
I love it. I think the guests like the space. I don't know if the chefs like the space.
Oh, is that right?
I mean, it was a difficult, subterranean,
Yeah.
kind of going around the corners, but really, truly.
It's kind of a little vibe down there, though.
Oh my
I don't know.
gosh, of course.
Yeah.
And bringing that style of Thai cooking to New York. And then I think Thai Diner is.
I think that's what it was for me, is just having that type of food in New York. It was a great moment. Yeah.
Your favorite cookbook of all time?
Oh my God, that's a hard one. I honestly, just having mentioned it a couple times, but like Platter of Figs or something like that.
Yeah.
I have a lot. But yeah, that one jumps out to me. That's one I've referenced a lot. I just love his writing.
Yeah. David Tan's Platter of Figs. Is there a favorite recent cookbook discovery that you've made?
Yeah, actually, Randy, one of the owners, just turned me on to Italia and Boca. Have you seen those books
No,
at all?
no,
Oh
no.
my God, they're gonna blow your mind. Weirdly, like they're done on cardboard almost, with all these like hand painted, illustrated drawings of like pasta monsters, and like you have to Google it after this, because there's some incredible artwork in there, and just beautiful like regional Italian cooking. There's one for every region in Italy, and it's like a whole collection that apparently is becoming harder and harder to find. I guess it's like a kind of a known thing now.
Yeah.
Kind of has a cult following. But I don't get into a lot of cookbooks lately. I have a huge collection at home, and I did that for a while, but lately I'm kind of like immersed in the Horsemen at all times. But those books kind of like picked my head up out of that. And I was like, okay, I need to get a couple of these. Yeah.
Your favorite city to visit outside America for food?
Tokyo. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need to say much more.
Yeah.
Pretty good city. Last one, your favorite sandwich?
Favorite sandwich? I mean the classic Parisian ham and cheese or ham and butter on baguette.
Yeah.
To me is perfect. Yeah.
Absolute simplicity at its best. Nick Curtola, thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you for having me.
So, Aliza, I just had a great conversation with Nick from Four Horsemen, and I wanted to get your take and have a conversation about just this restaurant that means so much to New York and also broadly for trends. I mean, they kind of were a trendsetter in some ways. What are your takes on Four Horsemen?
Well, since we brought this up, I've been trying to think about the first time that I ate there.
Yeah.
When did you eat there for the first time?
I went there, I think I went within the first 2 years. And I remember Grand Street at the time wasn't at all what it is today. And I recall the restaurant that was there before, long ago. I remember going there and feeling like, man, this place seems familiar. But also walking in right away, I had to like really like notice the Scandinavian furniture and the wood, the way it kind of has that ethos. And like, for me, when I entered it, I was like, this place is not just the James Murphy restaurant, which is what I think all the headlines were. And Nick hints at like how when they opened, they collectively, the Four Horsemen, which Nick is not one of, didn't have any restaurant experience and were kind of winging it. And so in those early days, for me, it felt like they were doing something very special because they were going against the current a lot with just the style of service. But we can get into that. What about you? What was your first experience?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned it because I did go in knowing it as the James Murphy wine bar, partially because I was doing music writing before food writing, and I loved LCD Sound System. And I think I probably went for the first time in 2017 when I had moved to the city full time. And I remember walking in, and the first thing you really encounter, even before all the wood furniture, is the bar. Right where you walk in, and there's two people behind the bar that are pouring wine and kind of running the domain. And I think it really kind of centered it to me as yes, this is an amazing restaurant where the food is really delicious and thoughtful and seasonal and all of those things, but that the wine is kind of a forefront in the same way as well. And since then, it's been kind of one of my go-to special occasion restaurants here in the city. Certainly, I've been for pop-ups every once in a while for like a special lunch. I think lunch is kind of the more like insidery meal of the day to eat there. It's less of like the special occasion dinner and something quicker. But even for Cake Scene, for the first 2 years after we finished an issue, we didn't pay ourselves, but we would go to Four Horsemen and have a meal together.
Yeah.
And since our art director, Noah, moved to Paris, that's fell off a little bit. But still, when he's back in town, and if we're going to be together to celebrate, that's probably the restaurant we're going to.
I think of walking in and seeing James working the floor and thinking, there are half of the people in here are like James Murphy fans, and it's got to be pretty awkward for him. But the other half are probably have no idea who he is, and they're there for the wine. And I always thought that dynamic was very interesting because like James was always there when I was there. It seemed like he enjoyed being in the space. And
I've never seen him there. So
really
I think
interesting.
Different eras, probably.
Yeah, probably. I think this is like because I think you've gone much more than me because I feel like I haven't gone in so long. I need to go back, but. It's an interesting idea. This is like one of the early restaurants to champion natural wine at the wine bar at the Pass and not just being in a wine bottle shop. And I always felt like there was a very clear attention to the diner, and it wasn't a place to upsell wines, which I thought for me, writing about wine, I used to write a lot about spirits and wine, and I always felt like that was like a move that like this kind of intimidation or even just like maybe not intimidation, but this general excitement from the som or from the wine manager or even the server to push larger bottles, more expensive bottles. Sometimes it was for monetary reasons, but I always felt like there was no pressure there. They were definitely giving plenty of tastes. And that's credit Justin Chernow while working the floor and also just generally the well-trained staff.
Yeah, I really think the whole team there is so lovely, and my buddy Will is one of the main wine guys there, and I certainly agree with what you're saying about it being like these are bottles that I'm really excited about and I want to share with you, and I've always felt very comfortable saying this is the price range that we want for tonight, or this is the kind of vibe that we want. And I don't really consider myself to be a trained wine person, and sometimes I dine with people that, you know, I just pass that whole thick book to them because I think that's their fun reading material and they want to choose it, but sometimes I'll just say this is, you know, the kind of vibe that I want to have tonight. And I think that it is special that you can feel that you'll have something really delicious without judgment.
Can we talk about the bread?
Sure.
So for me, when I first walked in and had that first meal, the rye bread was something that really stuck with me. Or the bread, I think it was rye, but like there was a bread service, which at that time, it felt like charging for bread and spreads was like kind of a thing that was only reserved for like Dan Barber and places that were not on Grand Street in Brooklyn. But there was like a real attention to bread. And I think that's continued. I haven't been in a while. I think they do serve like a daily bread and spreads.
Yeah, they do like a really good crusty sourdough with butter. It's not like a free bread basket that comes to the table. It's something you have to order. But I find that, especially if I'm getting things that are more soupy or saucy, it's kind of a nice addition to the table.
Yeah, exactly. It was a place that sold bread instead of it being complimentary with the meal. And we think about our current times where that's kind of the default. You pay for bread, and then we're happy to pay for bread. It's very important to support the bread program at a restaurant. It should be, you know, charged. But back then, it was a little bit newer for the restaurant scene to have like a loaf of bread for sale. And I just remember it was terrific. And Nick's cooking, I think I mentioned it in the interview, but he's really an underrated chef in New York. I think he is somebody who trained at Franny's and in California and in Europe. And I think he is really, really talented and always pushing the specials forward. And in the cookbook, he really digs into a lot of the specials that landed at Four Horsemen. And, you know, it's a sneaky Michelin star restaurant, frankly. And we think of it as a wine. We think of it about James. We really got to give Nick a lot of credit for the success of Four Horsemen.
Yeah, I think their food program is one of my favorites in the city. It's why I make it. Certainly they have a great wine menu, but I think because the food itself feels warm and cozy, but also, you know, a little chefy, like not things I would make at home. It's kind of the perfect destination restaurant for me. Also, their desserts I think are quite good.
Oh, yeah,
I really like the Basque cheesecake that they do. That's kind of brushed with sherry vinegar and honey for that tangy, sweet finish. It's pretty unusual. Also, the sticky toffee pudding is kind of a classic, I would say.
Very much so. In both recipes, I believe, are in the book. The sticky toffee pudding is in the book. I think the Boston cheesecake is as well. And definitely underrated. I mean, a lot of it is like, it's kind of effortlessly good. I feel like that's the vibe of that place.
Yeah, I think it's funny to have a cookbook because certainly these are things that I would love to make at home and the recipes are great. But I think that the magic of Four Horsemen is kind of the sum of its parts, and being in that space with that staff, with the potential to go dance at night moves after if you want. Like, even though I would love to make these recipes at home, and I'm sure that I will, I don't think anything really will compare to actually being in the restaurant.
Let's talk about Night Moves and then their future, because there's definitely some things to be said. I've never been to Night Moves. I feel like I need to go and check it out. Have you been recently?
I haven't been super recently. I have friends that go a lot on like the Sunday nights, Monday kind of days. Are they open on Mondays?
I don't know. One of those days.
The off days.
Yeah.
I think their crowd is pretty different on the weekend compared to more of the off days, but they have this incredible like light up disco dance floor, which I think was the first reason why I wanted to go there before. And it does feel like a really special place, and you are walking through this plywood unfinished hallway and you don't really know what's going to lie at the other side of it, and then the door opens and it feels like a little portal into something else. And also they do fun pop-ups there sometimes. I remember like Sunny used to do the Bonchon by Sunny pop-ups there before she was up at Achilles Heel, which now she is somewhere else again. But I think it's cool that they have another spot, and they, as you know, are hard at work on opening more on Grand Street as well.
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about the excitement around their Italian restaurant that they're opening. Nick says it's going to be much larger than Four Horsemen, which is great. And seeing Nick cook with an Italian focus is exciting. I know he's certainly worked at Italian restaurants, Franny's being the most prominent, but he's definitely going to have a lot of attention on him during that opening. And I'm sure he's excited to share his menu. I can't wait to go. Happy 10 years to Four Horsemen, right?
And 10 more, yeah.
I know, 10 more. This is Taste is hosted by Aliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.